Mr. Tiernan, will you please take roll?
Board Member Durham.
Here.
Board Member Gates.
Here.
Chair Janes.
Here.
Board Member Anglin.
Here.
And Board Member Winterberg has not arrived yet.
Thank you. I would like to ask for unanimous consent to adopt the agenda with the following change, that we swap the positions of numbers 8 and 9. Is there any objection?
No.
Great. We will proceed to approval of the minutes. We have two sets of minutes to approve. Let's address them in separate actions. For June 14th, 2011, are there any corrections? And
No.
we can have unanimous consent to approve those, I'm sure?
Yes.
Great. And I will note that Member Wennerberg is here. Hi, Raj, welcome. And for July 12th, any corrections?
No.
Mr. Tiernan, will you conduct a roll call vote for those minutes, please, of July 12th?
Board Member Durham.
Yay.
Board Member Gates. Chair Janes.
Abstaining because I was absent for the meeting.
Board Member Anglin.
Yes.
Board Member Winterberg.
Yes. Thank you, Bob.
And that is on the last set of...
July 12th, I did not participate in the vote because I wasn't here for the meeting. Thank you. Anyone, hi, everybody. Anybody here who'd like to talk about something not on the agenda? Nope. So we will skip over the vacant consent and public hearing items and listen to a presentation from Town Manager Steve Rogers. Hi, Steve.
Good evening, everybody. A pleasure to pop in and check in with you, as always. One of the things we want to talk a little bit about tonight is preparation and some forward thinking for the joint communication session between the Town Council and the ZDRB. And it's kind of interesting that you all have been having some dialogue with staff, because one of the things we've been working on with the Town Council is also a vehicle and a discussion point, so that they're going to be reaching out and having a conversation with each of their advisory bodies. So the synergy of the two group discussions is actually pretty timely. I handed out a copy of the strategic plan for the council, and this has been adopted, and I think there's a couple key elements. That one, this is a 5-year rolling strategic plan that outlines the priority for how the council wants to identify and work with its resources. A lot of these are policy, and a lot of these are yet to be defined. In other words, they're work plans. What I think is really exciting is that a whole major thrust is called community character. And 2.1 includes maintaining and enhancing, and I'm on page 21 if you want to cheat, maintaining and enhancing the appearance of Yountville. And this talks about the general plan, the zoning ordinance, design ordinance, as well as other policy documents that the town utilizes in order to maintain that appearance. And it may be time that some of those are updated or reflected, and that leads to some of the conversation. Secondly, 2.2 is land uses for a well-planned community. Yountville is nearing a very unique situation. We physically can count the number of vacant parcels on two hands. So we're approaching build-out. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have change, because you have redevelopment and you have various other things. But again, it's how do we work on and what do we want to achieve as an end product from our zoning, in terms of how does it affect the community resources, our funding, service delivery, planning balance between the business community impacts, residential impacts, et cetera. 2.3 is historic resources. This is an area that's, I think, going to be requiring some great opportunities for involvement from both the public, the ZDRB, and the council over time. But it's what do we want to do with respect to Old Town historic, or broader. You know, there are zoning design standards for communities, and then there are zoning design standards for historic preservation, and they can run a very strong gamut from very little that a property owner can do to their property that's deemed historic, to policy guidelines, to options. So it's a good conversation point to perhaps look at what our community's historic assets are. How do we define Old Town? Because Old Town's not necessarily all old. I mean, there's a lot of Old Town that looks old that's not. So it's a good conversation starter in terms of what might that look like, what goes broader. Perhaps develop historic preservation policies, programs, and also discussion about the potential for a historic resource element in the general plan. Now, I lay these all out because these are all outlined as a strategic plan over the next 5 years that the council has identified. 2.4 is code enforcement. You know, we've been a very blessed community in many regards that code enforcement has generally been a issue that has been able to be resolved at levels that are not necessary in many communities. We're starting to see, though, on a number of arenas where maintaining appropriate conditional use permit compliance, property compliance, and a maturization. So it's an area that the town's going to have to spend more energy. How do we go about doing that? What's our customer service philosophy? What's the education approach, and how do we do it? Again, there's some great opportunities in terms of how we might look at policies, changes, doing things differently, and again, what potential role might the ZDRB have with that. And then 2.5 is what's known in short as environmental sustainability, and that's more than just when people think of climate. This is our overall use of resources, planning, impacts. And then 2.6 is consider streamlining the planning process. And that's meant more to be, and not necessarily that there's anything wrong, but is there a way to expedite an outcome? You know, what are we trying to achieve? Most often we hear from folks that go through the process that they're always concerned about the time. You know, and that's just something we have to take a step back. You know, and it may be that we come out and say, no, this process works for our community. But we have to be willing, I think, to take that step back and say, are we making people go through stuff that's not necessary or not? So obviously that's not all going to happen in 1 year. But I think it's germane to a starting point with a joint conversation with the council. I feel pretty proud of what the planning and ZDRB has done this year. We've really spent a lot of time being able to make some small improvements in some of our land use policies. You guys have been instrumental in helping to listen and shape some of those. Not everybody always agrees with all of the refinement, but that's part of the process. It's also a good opportunity to check in with the council and make sure that these policy guidelines, are there some areas that you might be interested in working on that from your all's perspective might need some attention? And then also from the council to perhaps share with you what they're hearing from the community might be areas that they think need some attention. And then together, hopefully, we're able to craft a work plan. Because what I think you're seeing right now that can be very positive is we're seeing a ZDRB that's maturing from having to deal with simply project by project by project. We're now able to take some time and look proactively at how do our policies work. Does a policy that's been in place for 15 years still achieve the outcome that we're looking at? And when you're processing application after application after application, given the resources that we have, that's not always possible. So anyway, I think it's a good framework, but I did want to make sure that you all had a chance to have a copy of the strategic plan prior to that, because we will do a little PowerPoint kind of walk through. And just to give you an idea of what we're anticipating for the conversation on the meeting of September 6th, I always get in trouble when I say this, but as of now, it's a light council agenda, and the expectation that we have is that we will run through the council meeting, take a short break, reassemble, staff will move, the ZDRB will take seats here and allow for a kind of a facilitated conversation for the remainder of the meeting, which will be also live web streaming and everything. So both, I think, the council and staff, we're all looking kind of forward to it, and I do know that you all have had some interest and some questions, so I think it's going to be a productive discussion and hopefully help shape the workload and also an understanding of where we want to go and how the resources will get applied to that. So any questions that you have, I'd certainly be happy to try to answer any of those.
Thank you, Steve. I think we're looking forward to it, though. Be a neat opportunity to have a
Excellent, yeah.
little louder voice. Thanks very much, Steve. We will proceed to a presentation and discussion to talk about the wayfinding sign program. Pray go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. Is on or not? Staff made a presentation 2 weeks ago to members of the business community that was organized by the Chamber of Commerce. And this is a PowerPoint presentation, if I can get it going here. Oh, there it is. All right. Okay. Just bear with me 1 second. Shouldn't have pushed that first button. There we go. Okay. This is a program that there's been interest in the business community as far as organizing and implementing a wayfinding sign program. And by wayfinding sign, I mean the types of signs that are clustered that direct visitors to businesses that are in the vicinity of the sign cluster. And they have these in downtown Napa. You've probably seen them, also Healdsburg. And we'll be looking at some other examples later on in the slideshow. The purpose of the program is to provide an easily understood, uniform system of pedestrian-oriented clustered signs that direct visitors to businesses within the commercial areas. One primary objective is to increase awareness of the north end of town and that commercial node. Right now, there's a lot of things in progress that will eventually be open, we hope, sooner than later, at the north end of town, and we would like to be ready for them in order to, there's a feeling up there that frequently people come to the center and south portion of town, they're not even aware that there's another commercial node, and they bypass it or leave town without experiencing that area. Direct visitors to businesses with no or minimal visibility from the street. There are some businesses in town that have no frontage onto Washington, our primary business street. And it's to identify those at the sidewalk and make the visitors aware of their presence. Encourage pedestrian traffic and increase visitor stay time in town by the more they're aware of that's available in town, the longer they'll stay in town, the more they'll experience. Opportunity to provide a uniform brand for the business community by this organized uniform sign program. And also the design of the clusters, that there's a uniformity to them to where there's the visitor can zero in on that's information useful to me. They know where to go to read these signs and get information. Some general criteria for these signs that staff has suggested here is that the size of the signs are pedestrian in scale, and they're not intended to be of use to or give directions to motorists. Signs shall indicate business identification and a direction arrow. Off-site advertisement of products and services is not a purpose of the program. Each sign shall be designed to prominently display the business name and a descriptive line identifying the products or services. And that description is subordinate to the business name. Phone numbers, website addresses are not intended to be shown on the sign. And relative to this, a question came up that, well, does this mean that directories that say Edward James Courtyard, we're going to get rid of those? No signs will be reduced. This is in addition to whatever signage is allowed by the sign ordinance now. So we're not intending to reduce directory signs that are already in existence. These signs are limited to Washington Street. Right now, we're looking at a limit of 2 signs per business. Now, these are all suggestions. These are not hard and fast rules yet. And part of the purpose of this, well, the purpose of this presentation is to solicit the ZDRB's suggestions and comments to this program, ideas if you have any. The design aesthetic is to be determined, but we got a little more information from the business community as far as some preferences there. Part of that was a preference for a uniform font and color to these signs, the placards that are on the clusters. In some other communities, they have a more gridiron business district. Ours is more lineal in form, to where they are directing at a crossroads, kind of a 90-degree angle, left and right and forward. We don't envision that would be necessary. These are going to be more of on a single post kind of a configuration. Establish a priority order for eligibility. That's something that is open for discussion in other communities, and you'll see some of the models from other communities of how they've organized their cluster programs. Where these signs are located, fundamental concept is to direct visitors to businesses that are ahead or hidden. Direction of signs should be on the approach to the business location unless the business is not visible from the street. And the idea here is if the business, Wells Fargo is right there, you don't need a Wells Fargo cluster sign. It's more to indicate what's ahead to the visitor, or if the business is right there but not visible from the street, to direct them to the interior portion of the lot. Generally, the cluster position is at the start of a commercial block with sufficient visual clearance from the intersection, a whole bunch of rules about not blocking visibility to motorists or to other signs, to street lights. Clusters not block the path of travel. They're usually in the planting strip or near the curb between parking spaces at the front and back of parking spaces that don't impede door swing for automobiles that are parked. Again, I covered the not obstructing other, including things like street lighting, public art, views to other objects of interest. Establish some minimum distance between the sign clusters. Sign clusters on opposing sides of the street should be offset and spaced a sufficient distance to avoid concentrating clusters. In actual field evaluation, that may not be as important to offset, but we're going to verify all of the locations, and this next graphic showed some early suggestions. Other possible information for inclusion is color coding by business type or keyed to a district location, walking distances, particularly to the north end of Washington Street, that it's from, say, Bouchon, it's a 6-minute walk. That's useful information to keep someone from getting in their car, moving their car, and trying to find parking again at the north end of town, letting them know that it's a short walk. These are some very early suggested locations, and some ideas came out of the meeting with the chamber members about particularly the hidden locations. Say at V Marketplace would be perhaps an appropriate location for one in front there. Funding. It has not identified, bottom line, has not really been identified yet. We suggested the T-bid, and that was not preferred by some of the members of the chamber. They saw that money as really being more devoted towards increasing business to inns and transient uses, or transient occupancy uses, inns, hotels. Other schemes that are used elsewhere are subscription plans and one-time fee structure that's paid by the business with an ongoing maintenance cost. There's some other ideas that have come up with using these clustered posts as a kiosk for information, other information. And there's a list there showing some of the other ideas. Now, one of the things that was favored by the chamber members was perhaps a map that would be included, kind of a "you are here," with some other additional information that's useful as far as public parking and restrooms and ATMs. We'll get into the examples from some of the other cities now. The city of Healdsburg has a similar program. They require, as you probably all know, they have a central square. They require the business to be located within the downtown business district, but they exclude businesses that are located in front directly onto the Healdsburg Plaza from the sign program. They have a limit, 2-sign limit. Business must be open on weekends and must be a business that primarily meets needs of visitors. Service businesses and offices are generally excluded. Their fee structure is a $128 processing fee for sign review, and that covers up to 2 of the same sign design. And if all of the spaces are taken, then they are put on a waiting list for next available space. The applicant pays for the sign, and they have specifications. In their case, they have the largest one, which is a 7-inch tall by 17.5-inch wide. And then they have specifications for its own aluminum. This is an idea of how this is their plaza here, and then they have around it and further down in business locations. All of this is a business district for them. They do have the signs that are point in 2 directions, and because they have this gridiron business district. And this is an example of that. Now they've gone with the model of the font logo of the business name is shown just as it appears on their business identification sign. This was not really favored by the chamber here. And this is one of their single paneled configurations. I think they get 9 signs on these. These are the tallest signs we saw, and you don't get many at that size. And it's almost as though they're encouraging kind of motorists to try to read these with their size, and that's not really what we're shooting for here. It's if you've seen over by Whistle Stop, there are a couple very low. You wouldn't see them if a car were parked there, and that's okay because they're not intended to be viewed from the street. But they show some of the businesses with little arrows, uniform and font and color and design, and I think that's more the idea. They're very small, pedestrian scale. This was a spec sheet for Healdsburg, although the mission bell at the top was deleted in the final design, and you'll see in the next one, Sonoma picked up the mission bell, same design, and it appears in their signs in their downtown. City of Sonoma, their plan is a hierarchy of eligibility based on proximity to their central plaza, with the first preference given to businesses located on the ground floor and having an entrance from the periphery block to the plaza. And they've ordered, have a priority order of types of businesses. That the first ones are retail, restaurants, pubs, taverns, wine tasting, sales, paseos with entrance from the periphery block. Those are those breezeways off of the square into the interior block that many businesses are located on the interior of the block. Visitor-oriented entertainment businesses. Number 2 in the priority would be individual businesses in Category 1 within a paseo access from the periphery block. 3 businesses in Category 1 on a second periphery block from the plaza. 4 are personal service businesses, and 5 office uses. Now, they don't ban the service businesses and offices, but they're lower priority in this plan. The initial signage costs are funded through an economic development program of the city, and replacement placards are paid for by the business. If they have vacant, unsold placard space, then they have a generic promotional placard that goes in the vacant space. And their signs are 5.5 inches by 17.5 inches wide. So a little smaller, but still big enough to where you're not able to get a whole lot on. Here they have 9 on this one. See the mission bell motif that they picked up on theirs. I believe in our case we were discussing a sign size more in the neighborhood of 4 inches and tall, with a couple of inches for identification of the business name, and then a smaller line below it that would identify the type of business. City of Napa sign program is generally restricted to for-profit businesses. It's a partnership between the Napa Downtown Association and the city. They're placing 20 of these clusters on a subscription basis around the downtown. They've budgeted $20,000, so each individual cluster is $1,000. They have a $144 initial fee to the Downtown Business Association for the manufacturing costs of one sign and maintenance for 3 years, and then additional costs is charged for longer maintenance. They have a sign contract with a company called Sign Dimensions that they get, you'll see on this next one. They have kind of a uniform sign, although the logo and business name font is standardized to the business. They do include a direction arrow and a distance of shown in blocks that is standardized, and I believe that's why they're going with that one sign company that they've contracted with, so they get that consistency. The last one is a different, kind of a different plan than all the others. This is City of Concord. This is, they have a downtown business association called the Todos Santos Business Association, and they have a central plaza in Concord, and it's those businesses surround that plaza. Theirs is more like a mall, where it's a comprehensive listing of every business in that association, and a kind of a "you are here" map and a map of the surrounding area. It's color coded. I'll show you what they look like right here. This is one of their installations. It shows the map up above. This is some generic promotional stuff below, non-specific. Then on the other side, and I'll zero in on this a little closer here, this is what the other side looks like. It's a map of their downtown. This is a close-up of it. It shows all the buildings, and then it's color-coded into 3 districts, the red, the blue, and the yellow. And that aids on the directory the visitor. They have these numbers, and they have a color on them, so when you go back to the map, you at least zero it down to one of the 3 districts where you're looking for your number. And I'll point out the map also shows other useful information, such as parking, public parking areas, City Hall, BART down here, some direction to some of the other departments. This is a police department down here. And then some of the major business names are other parking areas, B of A parking and the theater parking here. So, and then all the street names. So what they're including on their list is the business name, everyone's listed, address, and a phone number. And finally, wrapping up, these are some other more advanced ideas for the future, perhaps, the idea of turning these into information kiosks to where if you were to mount an iPad, and this is a vandal-proof frame that an iPad could go into, and of course you can put whatever you want to program on this touchpad of town events, restaurants, reviews, anything you could think of could be in an iPad. And we could go out a little further to what's playing at the Lincoln Theater, upcoming, town events, what's offered at Community Hall as far as activities in the community center, classes, anything you can think of. These are some of these cases that they offer. This is a stainless steel one. This is a side view. They have a clear material that goes over that's actually vandal-proof. It's very, very tough plastic. And this is my last slide, actually. This is a downtown, I believe this is Portland. Their wayfinding is kind of a more municipal orientation to where it's not specific businesses. It's they're here to Pioneer Courthouse Square, Pioneer Place. These are points of interest, a map, and then transit information below. So in other larger cities, wayfinding takes on a different meaning. It's more of districts in the town. Oops, I think that's it. Yep. So as I mentioned, what came out of the meeting with the chamber were some ideas that we took at staff level to punch up the pedestrian orientation of the program and not make it something we're going to someone in a car try to read. We don't want that, someone stopping on Washington trying to decipher what's on a 5-inch tall sign. Our suggestion as staff is to decrease the size of the placard to perhaps 4 inches and have them shorter. All of those installations were, I would say, 7 foot tall and at least. Have a smaller installation, smaller placards, and you would be able to get more of them on that post. Include a map on there that's useful with some other useful information for parking and some other points of interest. This map of Concord, I do think that it provides some useful information when you show all of the specific buildings in silhouette, street names, and then parking, some of the other information that would be, and kind of a "you are here" would be to a visitor useful information. The uniform color and font, that is something that came out of the chamber group. Staff, there was a reaction to the metal post that was not in keeping with Yountville design. So staff would be looking and suggesting a wood-clad, perhaps metal post. To look at it, you would be looking at wood. It's used on our bus stops, which are metal posts, but they're wood-clad. And having an arm, top and bottom, I think there was a kind of a metal representation of this earlier, more like this, where you have a top and bottom arm with stringers and the individual signs. And all of this would be lower. I mean, this thing's got to be 7 feet here in this picture. So it'd be lower to the ground, smaller signs, more of them. Uniform colors to the sign and font. We would, again, array these. The location would emphasize what's ahead and what's hidden rather than unnecessary information. If you can see the thing, you don't want a sign right there. But a block before would be useful information that Wells Fargo is up ahead. You can't see it. And that That is about it, really. Any
I just add on,
suggestions?
one of the things after staff was evaluating some of the feedback, we came to the realization that because we are a linear system, basically just short of a mile, one of our original recommendations about a limit to 2 signs may not really be appropriate in this case, because if you are a business, we also came up with a new term, NOYO, that's North Yountville. So, just if anybody's interested, we've got. But part of the idea was if we're trying to link people and connect them, 2 might not, when we sat back and said that may not really be realistic given some of our gaps and trying to link it. And then I think there was some skepticism amongst a lot of folks as to, well, we don't have a Paseo. And we took a step back and said, yes, we do. If I ask all of you to tell me what's in Edward James Courtyard, can you do it? One of you can do Plaza Corsia, or should be able to. V Marketplace and Washington Square. So when we took a step back and said, hold on, there really is a need, because, in talking to locals, I even come into people that don't know. They drive by and they see the buildings and they see stuff on the front, but they don't necessarily know what awaits them. And I think part of what we're saying is we're hearing that. And we want to be able to work on something that matches our community aesthetic. And again, most of this funding is going to come from the participants, but yet also be helpful, because if we can improve that. I will share with you, it's an interesting statistic. One of the things that when we've done a little surveying of our guests, the number one thing that they would like to see a bit more of is what they call a broader retail experience in Yountville. We got food, we got great food, stellar lodging, and they like the retail that they stumbled into, but their presence of mind is that we're generally lacking in retail. And folks would like a bit more. And part of that is just a realization they're not necessarily experiencing that which we have. So that'd be the first thing to do. And then obviously we still have a few gaps in terms of vacant parcels that we would like to steer towards potentially more. So for staff, this has been an eye-opening experience, because we've had to take a step back, and people that have lived in the community think they know and are very familiar where everything is, and we learned a few things about ourselves. Bob forgot to mention that one of the requirements for any participant is they must sign an acknowledgement that they will never, ever, ever in the rest of their life, subject to their firstborn child, use an A-frame sign, or they don't get to participate in the program.
As you see in this photo here, or they still have them out there.
Now, we think we can put together something, and I think we were very surprised and pleased to hear the business community recognize that, and they were the ones that basically said, that's not Yountville. Those signs are too garish, they stand out. So, what we're looking at is something that might say Bottega and then restaurant, or it could say Sisters, shopping, retail, clothing. We'll work that through, but, simple. And we really wanted to get it at a pedestrian scale, so there's no argument that this is meant to be seen or understood by somebody driving. So it's been an interesting conversation to date. Clearly, we want to get some ideas and feedback from you, and then staff needs to go work on a couple, we got to come up with a mock-up of what we think the Yountville aesthetic looks like. And if you go look at one of the support braces for our bus stop, that's sort of what we stumbled onto, and we actually think it will work. And then we can probably do some type of aluminum, brown on brown or something like that in terms of the signage, and we'll come up with a couple different. So that's where we're headed. So I would assume it's nice to see a crowd in the ZDRB meeting. And we know that this is kind of new, and we know you've been hearing about it. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at. So it's kind of a fun change of pace for planning staff.
One thing that I'm going to try to make happen before the council meeting is when we were walking around looking at candidate sites for some of these signs, it occurred to me it would be valuable information if, and this sounds a little crazy, but to mount time-lapse camera on, say, Pac Blues or Wells Fargo Bank, and just for a day, take time-lapse to where you see the streams of people and like look at it for 5 minutes and you get a whole day, and see where people walk, where gets the most traffic, pedestrian traffic. And in locating these signs, that would be valuable information.
Bob, Steve, thank you. Before we hear from our admirers, does anyone have questions of staff? I have two on the report, Bob. Will you show the slide again that depicted sort of a draft of location and quantity? I know that was conceptual, but you had one map that I think
okay.
showed perhaps a conceptual layout of how many? That one. So that's an idea of that could be, say, 5 locations, maybe half a dozen.
Actually, I would say when we went back and measured that out in real life, that's probably not quite enough.
What,
If we
so,
went farther north.
I'll make
In
my
order to
question.
provide that
What
linkage.
do you think would be the total quantity, conceptually? 8, 10?
I would say 10 or less, and it depends again on part of what, and like I say, we had a lot of fun in the field because we started looking at, if I don't know what's ahead of me and I'm here, how many do I need to help get that linkage, especially walk from south to north and then pretend that you're in front of the, so we don't fully know. Obviously, it also depends a little bit on who wants to participate, and that's why we came to the conclusion some businesses may only be fine with 2 signs. Somebody else that really wants to get there, a Jessup or somebody that's on the north end, Maisonnerie, may need several starting at the center and drawing people, fluidly all the way to the north. So that's why we would say some of those conversations are a bit in flux as we play around with what looks real on the street when we walk it.
Okay. My last question about the report, can you help me understand what I think is a seeming conflict between the purpose in these draft guidelines, the purpose of the sign program and the general criteria? One is to increase visitor awareness of businesses with no or minimal visibility from the street, and one of the criteria is lowering the priority to people without visibility. So it seems to me those are,
No.
yes,
Higher
establishing priority and a lower priority.
For people, higher priority for people that have no visibility. Or limited visibility.
Okay,
That's what I read.
I think you're right. Who would like to talk to us? Please come up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Go right ahead, Ron.
Was there any discussion about doing like one map and then a bunch of different signs, like having one map, kiosk center at the community center, and then directional signs throughout town? Or is it, or are we thinking one or the other?
Well, I suppose we thought it would be more helpful at these spread-out locations to wherever you are there to have a map. And we're hoping to get it compact enough to where it fits on the width of the post. So it's not going to be this huge thing hanging off the post. It's going to be small but chock full of information.
And then are we thinking front and back or just one side?
On the placards, front and back, so that is that ahead and the other is the other ahead for the going the other way. And then again, it's, as Steve said, it depends on who's wanting to participate.
And then we already have wayfinding signs or some directional signs. Would this be replacing those, or those would remain as well?
You mean the small ones in front of
Yeah,
us? Top? That,
Well, no,
Those
we
would-
have some like across from Edward James Courtyard. There are a couple throughout town that are small ones that say we're shopping this direction, or
are they on the building?
no.
No,
Freestanding.
Member Winterberg's correct. There's maybe 2 or 3, and they probably would be phased out. The larger ones, when you come into town that are more driving scale, would not be. I think there's one. There's also one that's kind of right at the pathways. They're small blue ones with a very generic, and they're only about 2.5 feet tall. And most of the time, they're blocked by the vehicles parked. So I think as part of this program, that would be something we would look at, seriously take a look and see if that may, that need may be replaced once we put this program together, and that will help to reduce clutter so that we try to, part of our objective is to not put more of these signposts up than is absolutely necessary while drawing that linkage.
I've got a question, sorry. Bob, have you determined if all businesses will be on there, or as I think it was Hillsburg, if it meets the needs of visitors?
The types of business? We saw the program as essentially being directed towards visitor accommodation, and so they would be businesses that fulfill that need, and I think it would be a similar priority that a business that is visitor-oriented, a business that's open on weekends, as opposed to, I don't know that we would, out of hand, and this is all up for discussion, but say not allow an office. Maybe that's possible. I think it's going to come down to space available.
Because I think of Thomas Keller's restaurant group at the back of Edward James Plaza. I think about the Villaggio sales and catering at the back of the marketplace and those things. So I'm just wondering if they'd be on there.
Yeah, I mean, my dentist is hidden away, so but would a visitor be interested in, knowing where the dentist is? So it's really, I guess the test is it useful information to a first-time person in Yountville, as opposed to someone who lives here, knows where their dentist is, and yeah.
Bob, I'm keen on the iPad kiosk idea. Do you know any towns or communities around that are currently using this?
I do not.
Just promotional sales material or something?
They're used, of course, more in probably business settings and malls and exhibit halls and that kind of thing. But there's no reason it couldn't be applied to something like this.
And that is something we might do one at the center of town, at the community center type thing, if we can get a feel for that. Because I don't know that we would need to put, 10 of those up. That certainly would not be the case.
Terrific idea.
No more questions of staff at this time? Public? Hi, Jan.
Good evening, gentlemen. Nice to see you again. Jan Fector, V Marketplace, 6525 Washington Street. Thank you, staff. They've been peppered with emails from me for some time regarding some sort of wayfinding signage program that is pedestrian-oriented, so we can get folks to understand that we have more than just a big brick building. We get a daily comment that says, I had no idea there were this many shops in here. So we really very much appreciate it, and some of my shop owners are here. I'm sad to see that more businesses in town aren't, because I think every business in town, of course, unless they're right on the street, could use this program. So I think it's a great program. I think it's a long time coming, and I thank the other cities for getting the work done ahead of us so we have examples to see and know what we do and don't want. So we had a really spirited group of people here at 8:30 in the morning a couple weeks ago to go over the beginnings of this, and I think you all saw my letter thanking you and encouraging you to take hard looks. I offered to purchase the frames that would go out in front of our businesses, so that if it comes down to a money issue, it shouldn't be. I mean, this is going to generate sales, in turn sales tax for all of us here in town. So thank you again. My shop owners may want to speak, but we look forward to this process, and I said I'd like to actively participate, and if there's a committee that's formed, I'm your girl. Thank you.
Jen, a question for you. How many businesses do you have?
18, including the restaurants.
Thanks.
You had no idea, did you?
I thought it was 16, but I thought I'd check.
Close, Jason.
2 in transition.
Thanks.
I do have it on good word that the dentist is appreciative of the chocolate shop
Hi, anyone else? All right. All right.
We really do, we appreciate that. I love the iPad
M-
idea.
we need-
with one unmarked- with one-
You have to,
no.
you have to come up, so you get recorded
Your name and address.
and filmed, put on the web.
6525 Washington Street. I am in favor of the iPad system with like one map. Not maps everywhere with on all of the signage. I think that gets overwhelming, confusing. We are not a mall. We are boutiques of whatever sort, chocolate boutique, children's clothing, our clothing, whatever. But I think one central zoning that, or spot that has kind of that, iPad, what do you call it?
Kiosk.
Kiosk, yeah, that area I think would be great, but
Okay.
that's.
Sounds good.
So shall we discuss and try to forward some recommendations? Anyone care to begin to perhaps summarize what you like?
I can start.
Bueller?
You want to start?
Go for it.
Okay. I think it's a great idea. I just think the time has come for something like this. And there are lots of different ways to approach this. I mean, the thing that I like, essentially, when I look at the signs in Napa and in Healdsburg and other places like that, where people's logos are on the sign kiosk, I really have a tendency not to really look at it. What I do notice about Napa is that they do give a distance to the business. So, I'll scan maybe the signs and then know how far I have to go. So I think it's important to have some sense of how far you have to go to that business. The things I think that are really important on a sign program are the name of the business. And I sort of agree with what staff is saying, that it's the name of the business and what kind of service that you provide. If it's, Sisters, it's retail and the type of retail that you do. If it's Bottega, it's a restaurant, Italian. And so you can have concise kind of uniformity in that. I think it's important the distance to that business. I think actually a map is really important for me. When I go someplace, and maybe it's because of my profession, but I like to see a map, and so I get a sense of the size of the town, because if I come here, I don't really have a sense of what your business district is, and a map can tell me that. Then the next thing I look for is maybe a service. If it's lunchtime and I want to go have a restaurant, have a lunch, I want to find out where the restaurants are. I don't want to necessarily find out, where I can have my glasses fixed or something like that. So if there's a way on the map that it's color-coded to the signage and to the service that's being provided, I could quickly look at, say, yellow as restaurants, and I could see that here are the different restaurants in town, and I can see where they are and how far it is to go to that restaurant, and then maybe the kind of restaurant that it is. So I think those are key kind of elements to me when I'm looking to get a sense of what a town is like. But a map really gives me a sense of the overall scope of where the town is in relationship to me. I like the idea of an iPad 2 or something like that in conjunction with these three things that I said. And the thing that is neat about it is if you take your iPhone and they have these scanner bars, and you pass your phone over the scanner bar and it uploads that stuff into your phone. So then suddenly you have the information about that business that you can sort of walk through town and know more about that business and, or sit down and go over it and decide whether you want to go to that business. But it takes you to a link of what you are selling and how you present what you are selling. So I think it's a really great tool that you can use, and it's a technology that exists right now. So, so I do think that's a great idea. And then in terms of the locations, I think, as in malls, when I go to a mall, I want to find out kind of what's there. It's the same as visiting a town. And they usually have kind of magnets at either end of the mall. And so, not that we have a magnet at the No-Yo, but there is, I think that you should have all this information in a kiosk, a central kiosk there. So if you start in town, you would go to Jessup's, and then you want to go to Washington Square, whatever that's going to be called after the new restaurant comes in. To find out what the rest of the town is like, you can kind of get this information and decide, yeah, there are these other places in the south part of town that I'd like to go to. So I think it's important that there be one in that area that's being developed now. And I can see on the map that there isn't one there. The other place that I think is really important is at V Marketplace. And I think V Marketplace actually is a microcosm of a town. And so I think you need the same kind of kiosk information there that people can look at a map of plans of the V Marketplace and see what the businesses are there, what types of businesses, retail, restaurants, and do this download and can see how many different places are within this one building. And so I think that should be another one of these predominant kind of nodes in the town. Another one I would see is in front of the community center, because people are drawn there. They go there for events. They should have the opportunity to kind of scope out the town from that point. Then the other place that I would have one would be at the chamber office, because that is as important as the community center. So people are going to ask about the town and what's here, and they can go outside to one of these nodes and find out information. So I think it's a great program. I think there's some great ideas, and those are the things I'd like to see developed.
Thanks, Rob. Who's next?
I'd pretty much go along with what Robert said there. Thank you. If you go around and look on weekend who's really in town, there's a lot of younger people, couples and groups and so on. They're definitely used to using their smartphones and so on to make reservations, check availability, and so on. And I would lean, first of all, I think 10 signs is way too many. I mean, if you stop and look around at the number of signs already, stop signs, yield, this and that, 10 more signs seems pretty extreme to me. I would opt for more kiosks. The chamber is an excellent idea. Community center, absolutely, and probably one right behind Pacific Blues at V Marketplace would be another excellent spot. But 10 signs seems extreme, and I would be opposed to them having the signs, having the character of like their business cards or their business signage. I think they should be uniform, subdued, maybe put a website on it. If you want to connect them with Bottega or something on a click, that's a terrific idea. That's what the people who come here are used to doing. We should facilitate that, not stand in the way of it. And as far as the number of signs, again, on 10, maybe start out with a few and see if you need more. But I just think 10 is, I just opt for the iPads myself. That's the way I'd go. That's my comments.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay. I think first and foremost, consistency needs to be key in this town, given the amount of signs that we do have. Whatever goes up in terms of the amount of signs, I think need to be consistent, and we need to take into account what the bus stops looks like. The community center now has those 2 poles sticking up that we put banners on. The post office has the sign in front of it. I just think consistency is really important. I also think, given where we are with our parks and our art program, I think it would be really nice and important to include those types of things that are definitely geared towards expanding the tourist and visitors experience here in Yountville. I think those would be really good. I like the idea that Rob brought up earlier of a central map that could then lead you off to the directional signs that lead you in the direction you need to go. It sounds like I'm the only one here that's probably opposed to the iPads, simply because, as they stated, everyone has a smartphone. We already have the iPad in our hand. I don't know if the money that was spent on the iPads to go throughout the community could be better spent on the quality of the signs or the amount of signs. So also, I think it's important to have miles and time so people know how long it's only going to take 2 minutes to walk anywhere in this town. They don't need to get in their car. And, one last thing. As a hotel operator in Napa, I think a argument could be made that the TID could help to support this program as well, because I think it's very tourist oriented. And given the amount of people that I see when I'm just at the gym, at the whistle stop, who walk in on the last minute and want to stay because of their experience in Yountville, I think these signs definitely enhance that and would play into getting more heads and beds into Napa, specifically Yountville. So that's my points.
Thanks, Joe. Rob, you're up.
Ditto. Without going too much in depth, I'll try to hit some other things. I'm kind of for a subscription plan. The town doesn't have a ton of extra cash. We are lucky that we are comfortable. So I'd like the business owners in some way, whether it is through T-Bid or through some sort of subscription plan, pay for most, if not all of that. I'm for a central map. I was trying to sketch out what a map on every sign would look like. And, I mean, you know, I came from Denver, and Denver has a 16th Street Mall with the same idea that Portland has of a map on every. But that's because they've got, like, 50, 60 different places in, like, 8 square block radius, and that's, I think, important. When we just have a line, I'm kind of more for opting for fewer maps and fewer clutter because of that. I'd prefer to have more availability for sign spots. I mean, if you start thinking a 4-inch sign with an inch between, that's like 5 inches a sign. You take 10 signs on there, and we're already up to 50 inches without a map, and that's if it's on the ground. So I think we have to start looking about how many that would be limited to. So I'm kind of against that. I really want to support the vintage 1870 V Marketplace. I wonder how we're going to do 18 businesses, though. Jason, you asked that question. I was thinking the same thing. I assume not all of them would want to pay for a sign, but that right there would take up a couple different full sign things if we were going to identify each one of those. So I just want us to be thinking about, kind of priority, how that would happen. I think we need to look at priorities. I think we're going to have a limited number of signs, and so I was thinking of, who was it, Concord, Sonoma, that actually had a priority of, if they're off the beaten path, they get first priority. So if they're in Edward James, Piazza Quercia, or V-Mart, they get priority, and then we move from there. Or if they're, I guess, Washington Square would be considered too, because they're kind of off as well if they don't have a frontage. So I'd be supportive of a system like that where there were some sort of priority, because I think we're going to run out of spots, actually. I'm anti all of our clutter of signs here, so I'd be supportive of fewer. And I'd be really supportive of taking out the 4 or so ones we have already, especially since now they're going to look different. So it's going to look like 2 different kinds of wayfinding signs. And so if we're going to add these that might be more at a pedestrian scale and kind of off the path as opposed to facing the road, I'd like to get rid of the other ones so we don't have a whole bunch of signs. Because signs are good, it gets people where we want them to go, but it also can start looking really, really crowded, and I'm kind of anti that. Looking at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 we've got there, I could see a half dozen. Everybody, has mentioned different places where we might put them, and maybe that's a little further down the road. Like I see, maybe one that furthest north dot could actually go right before Hopper Creek, because what I see is a lot of people get to French Laundry, and then that looks like the end of town because it's just residential from there on, but really they have to go through some residential to get to the next spot. So that's kind of one where I'd see it, was I'd move that one south to Hopper Creek. Front and back, I just wanted to check that we were actually using that. Another thought, and as I was sketching it out, is we could, if it's pedestrian nature, it doesn't have to face the road. It could be, parallel to the road, a map with signs going north and south. So I want us to think about that too. We've looked at all these other ones where it's perpendicular to the road, but we could actually do parallel and have a map or signs. So just to throw that one out there as well. Really supportive of uniform font and color as opposed to the mishmash of 27 different ones. I think that covers my comments.
Thanks, Rob. I'll be very brief. Of the things presented, what I like are Sonoma's order of priority. As an aside, though, let's not put ourselves in the position of a business for its use permit must argue that it's local serving, and then when it wants to get on the sign, it has to argue that it's visitor serving. Nonetheless, I like Sonoma's order of priority, but we're setting up for a fundamental disconnect. I like Napa's general design for the sign frames. And indeed, I recommend metal to match the finish of our new street lights. I like Concord's kiosk layout. I agree, one kiosk that includes non-business information, parks, etc., Lincoln Theater, and other data located at the community center. In my view, the frames and the signs should be owned and maintained by the town of Yountville. I think the town could see fit to, if you will, fund it in advance, although I'm sure they'll collect the money from Jan for the two near her, and merely recoup the costs over time based on the subscription rates. And I suspect the agreement could be such that, annually they could capture those maintenance charges and moving forward change the rate. I agree with, I think, everyone that the signs text and font should be uniform. I agree with 4-inch height and maybe 4-inch height on the sign and perhaps capping the overall height of the monument, if you will, at, say, 48 inches. Steve, you had mentioned perhaps changing the proposed limit on signs, and perhaps it's maximum of 2 signs, provided the third sign is not nearer than, for example, 400 feet to any of the other 2. That's all I have to say. Good.
Thank you. A couple things I want to mention. This could be funded by the TBID. The local TBID advisory group has considered it in their program budget this year, and based on their other initiatives, they don't feel that this is consistent with their primary mission this year, and they're focusing more on yet active promotion, bringing people the movable feast and the winterscape. So it was conceptually discussed. There was a small placeholder. Again, I think when we sit down and look at where we're going and what the final costs are, we'll be able to come up with something that makes sense, and I do agree that it will be a partnership. More than likely, the town will be involved in the maintenance and overall one way or the other, because I think we can control it better that way, and that's going to be an important element.
And that's my point. Even if it were wholly funded by businesses, I'd want the businesses to be writing the money to the town so the town has control over the quality, the maintenance, and the placement.
And even the installation and making sure that it's all. So those are some good feedback. As you can see, we've got a lot of ideas. It's going to be kind of fun for staff as we finish with a couple models and then bring it back. And I do think, for the most part, we have moved local serving out of our vernacular area in the zoning, so we need to start doing that here. We just have businesses.
Good.
Hopefully, and successful businesses. Because that is, I do think you're right, that is kind of an interesting, as we go through the evolution in our community of what is local serving and what's not, and who has pizza. Because that seems to be the latest
biggest thing.
business development. Who has pizza?
Everybody.
Apparently everyone there.
Everybody and nobody all at the same
I
time.
even saw the round table delivery guy the other day, so apparently
Coming out of Keller's
apparently
restaurant?
we're opening up, so it's a big thing.
My children have discovered that.
No, I just wanted to make one other comment, and initially when I heard this, I kind of cringed, this no-yo and so-yo.
How about NoHo, north of Hopper Creek?
But, it sort of grows on you in a way. And I think, from a marketing standpoint, it might actually give it identity to the north end that it doesn't have right now. I'm not sure where you make the distinction on the south end. You could have, like, the mid part called Keogh, which is Keller Yountville. I don't know where the lines would be drawn. I don't know. But I'm starting to like this.
Yo-Yo, Young Yountville as opposed to Old Town.
Yeah, I was looking at Yo-Yo because I wanted it to work, because
Young Yountville.
Young Yountville.
It's not Old Town.
Well, in a way, the mid part of Yountville is really the garden that Keller has there. I mean, people are very interested in that. Now the chickens are there and stuff. It's almost another hub, another one of these nodes that I was talking about, that people get to there. They're very interested in the garden. But it sort of could propel them with this information to the north end, to Noyo.
I think you should talk directly to Keller about putting a kiosk right in front of the garden.
I like that idea.
Okay.
I think it's a
think
great
you should
idea.
personally.
I'll talk to him about that. No, but I think that, it is a good kind of jumping off place to the north end of town.
Thanks. We'll move on to any staff or board reports, upcoming information, anything to discuss, Bob?
None?
All right, do we all agree we should adjourn?
We do.
We do. Good night. Nice to see you all.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.